Okay, so now that we have our background working, we need to actually set the nodes on top of the background. You might be wondering, what is a node? Well, right now, if you've played like a modern day video game, you can move around pretty freely, but back in the day, we used like tiles, I guess. So Pacman is no different. So, for example, if Pacman started out right here, there would be another node, and then a node, and then a node. And this is going to tell him exactly where to go. Now, what's really convenient is that on top of these nodes, we're going to have visual indicators, which is going to be the pellets. So most nodes are going to have a pellet because Pacman is going to be able to enter that node. Exceptions being the warp gates. They do not have pellets, but they have to have nodes. So basically, nodes are just going to be tiny squares that cover up the entire map for where we're allowed to go. And when Pacman gets to the middle of one, that node is going to say, okay, we're able to go left and right, so either go left or right. Like if you made a node right here, for example, it would not be able to go up or down. So we're just going to use nodes to restrict the movement inside of this game. So let's start off by creating a folder called nodes. And well, so we create a game object, but we're going to be using the game object as a folder essentially. So we're going to create a child called node. We are going to give this node a child. So create empty, and we're just going to call this pellet. And the pellet is going to be the pellet or the power pellet. So we're going to give it a sprite renderer. And now if we go into our sprites, we will see the pellet. So just make sure pellet is clicked, and then we're going to drag pellet into there, right into the sprite section. We're going to give the scale maybe like a 1.5 so that it's a bit bigger because it's a bit small. We can adjust this later too if we have to. Maybe even like 1.8. No, that's a bit. Yeah, we'll keep it 1.5. Okay, so next we need to give it a box collider. And this is just going to be a collider around the pellet. Just so we know where each node is. We're actually going to be essentially removing this later because we won't need them. But we're going to have box colliders on top of all of these sections where there shouldn't be pellets. And if there is a pellet there, we're going to despawn it. That'll make sense later though, so don't worry about it now. We just need to start out, create this box collider. And make sure to click Edit Collider. And make sure that it's only about the size of the pellet. Another important thing, we want to make sure our pellet is never moved. So the X position of the pellet should never move. We want to be moving the node itself. Okay. And we're going to set the box collider is trigger to be true. And then we're going to be going up here to tags. And we're going to add tag. We're going to call this node. And this is just setup. I'll be showing you the uses of all of this stuff later. So we're going to set tag to node. Oh, make sure, set this back to untagged. Make sure that you set all these properties to your node and not your pellet. Your pellet should just have the sprite renderer. I'm actually going to minimize this so that it doesn't happen again. Set tag to node. Okay, so now what we're going to do is take our node and move it to the bottom left. And now, rather than creating a whole bunch of different nodes, we're going to write a script that does it for us so that we don't have to spend a bunch of time. The script itself is somewhat complicated, but don't worry about it. Okay, so we do want to make sure that it is as close to the center as possible because we're going to be spawning all the rest of the nodes based on this one's position. So you really want to make sure that it is close. And that seems to be pretty well in the middle on both the horizontal and the vertical. So we're just going to go with that for now, and if we decide to change it after, that's okay. Also, a reminder that if you're editing things, you want to be in your scene, and you want to be in your game tab whenever you are not editing. So I guess that will automatically come up when you play the game. I'm noticing our node is no longer visible. Okay, So I made a slight mistake. Just make sure your nodes, the folder, also has 0, 0, 0. Unfortunately, that's going to offset your node, but that's fine. Yeah, so we want the parent folder to have 0, 0, 0. And then we're just going to go back and adjust this value so that it's close to the middle. That seems pretty close, maybe a tiny bit farther down. And again, I'm being extremely meticulous about this because it is very important that we line this up. I'm going to, I would assume that I'm going to have different numbers than you as well, but they could be the same. If not, just try and use the same logic I'm doing to get it as close to the middle. Okay, so now that that's working, we're going to add a new component, and we're going to call this spawn nodes. And we're going to click new script and create an add. So you'll notice that when you type in something and it doesn't recognize what that is, it automatically says like create a new script. So that's basically all we had to do there. Now once the script is here, you can, oh, what just happened to my scene? There. Once the script is here, you can double click it and it will automatically load up in Visual Studio. So it's loading on my other monitor. I will bring it back in a second. Okay, so now we have access to our C# script, C# being the language. So we're going to create a variable called num to spawn, and it is going to be an integer, which is a whole number, and we're going to set it to 25. So now our computer recognizes this variable as the number 25. Because we're going to have 26 pellets on the bottom, so we're only going to be spawning 25 because we already have one. Then we're going to create an offset, so public float spawn offset, and this offset is just going to represent the number or the space between all of the nodes. So right now it's going to be wrong. We're going to have to adjust it in the inspector afterwards, but you'll see what I mean. So we're going to say, as soon as our program loads, if GameObject.name equals node, then we are going to loop. And if you don't know basic programming stuff, you can just copy and paste what I have. So we're basically, what this is doing is creating a loop 25 different times. So we are going to clone a new node essentially 25 different times because this will run 25 different times. So the first thing we're going to do is create our clone by typing in GameObject_clone equals instantiate. Instantiate is a function that Unity recognizes. And basically what you do is you send in the game object you want to clone, and if you type in game object by itself, it automatically references the current game object in the script. So this game object is what we want to clone. And then we need to send in the position that we want the clone to spawn into. So new vector3, usually we'll be using a vector2 because we're only doing 2D, but we need to use a vector3 for this for now. And a vector3 is basically just an X, Y, and Z position. So we're going to type in transform.position.x, transform.position.y, and just 0 for Z because it doesn't really matter. And then type in comma, quaternion.identity. You don't need to worry too much about what that means. Okay, so right now we are going to create 25 different clones, and they are going to spawn on our node's current position. So let's just try that out and see if it works. Okay, so I loaded it, and there are a bunch of nodes, and they are all in the exact same position. So that worked out. Now we need to put them in the correct position. So we are going to have another public float current spawn offset. And we're going to set inside of our if current spawn offset equals spawn offset. And now basically what we're going to do is each time a node is spawned, we are going to add an extra 0.3 to our X position. So it's going to spawn here, or it's going to, yeah, we're going to create a node. It's going to create a clone and spawn it just a little bit ahead of our X, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more until we have covered all of the game board. So in order to do this, rather than spawning our X position as the exact same, we're going to go the exact same plus our current spawn offset. You'll notice right now, if you loaded the game up, it would just spawn everything one node to the right, and then it would spawn all 25 on top of that, because we need to make sure that every single time we run the loop, we add our current spawn offset, or we add our spawn offset to our current spawn offset. That way, each time the loop runs, it gets just a little bit farther and farther to the right. So hopefully that makes sense. We're going to make sure we save our script, and we are going to go back, and now we're going to load up our game and see what happens. Okay, so funny enough, it actually seemed to load everything into the right position. It might be a little bit too far ahead. You can see this is a little bit farther to the right. What about the end piece? Yeah, the end piece is a bit farther to the right, but we're close. So what we're going to do now is just change our initial spawn offset to be slightly smaller. And because we made it public right here, it will show up on our inspector and we can edit the value directly. So we're just going to change spawn offset to 0.29. Now you can see that was actually too much. So we need to get really finicky here. We're going to go 0.295. And you want to really make sure that this is good. So still a little bit more. So we're going to go 296. I'm noticing the first node actually just might be a little bit too far to the left. So we're just gonna edit it a little bit. I know this part is a little bit irritating. Okay, that seems like it's pretty good now. It doesn't have to literally be exactly in the middle either. It just needs to be close enough where if Pacman was in the middle of it, he wouldn't be going through a wall if he changed directions. So this is good for me. For reference, my numbers for the first node were here, and this is what my spawn offset was. You don't want to copy the current offset. That always wants to be set to 0. So if you have the exact same things as me, it might work. But if not, just run through different numbers until you get it. Okay, so you're going to notice if you turn off the game, it reverts back to before you loaded the game, which means all of our clones would be gone. And that's bad. So we're going to highlight all of our nodes. And to do this really easily in Windows, you click the first one, hold the Shift key, and click the last one. And then we're going to drag it into our nodes folder. So now we're going to copy our nodes folder. And then we're going to turn off our game. You're going to notice all the clones are deleted. Now we're going to delete our nodes folder and paste in the new one that we created. And there we go. All of our nodes are now in our game when the game is turned off. Now the reason why we have this first line here that says if gameObject.name equals node is because you're going to notice that all of these spawns are node clone. Unity automatically adds clone to this. This is really important because if each one of the clones were running their own script that spawned more and more clones, it would spawn an infinite amount of clones. So we wanted to make sure that we only ran it on the very first one. This time though, it's going to be a little bit different because we want to spawn them vertically. So while we want to keep the logic there, we need to go and make sure that all of these nodes are named node. Now I could write a little script that would automatically change all of the names to be node, but this is also pretty quick. So this time it's a little bit different though, because we are going to spawn things vertically, which means we need all of these bottom nodes to run this script. So what we're going to do is in our start, we're going to type in return. Whoops. And this is just going to temporarily stop all of this code from running. Anything below return will not run. And then we're just going to set gameObject.name equal to node. Make sure the capitals are all right and all that stuff. Now if we reload the game, you're going to notice that everything is named node. So now we can do the exact same thing, copy the nodes folder, delete it, and paste it. So now all of our nodes are named node. So now when we run the script, all of those nodes will run the duplication clone script, but any spawned clone will not, because it will be named node clone. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we are going to set number to spawn equal to 28, because there's going to be 29 pellets going up and down. And then instead of adding current spawn offset to our x-axis, we just need to add it to our y-axis. So let's save the game and see if the numbers are relatively correct. Okay, so as you can see, it's just a little bit off. We need to make it a little bit higher of a number. So this time when we edit spawn offset, you need to make sure you have all the nodes highlighted so that it's editing spawn offset for every single node. We're just going to take this or change this to 0.299, make it a slight difference. And that actually is looking pretty good now. Let's zoom in a little bit. Yeah, everything seems to be where it should be. Cool. So the main things you want to check are like the warp points. Make sure that it's in the middle here, and the top. If it's middle in both of those places, you're probably good. So now we're going to do what we did before, and we are going to take all of our nodes, highlight them all, and put them into our nodes folder. Then we're going to copy our nodes folder, turn the game off, delete the nodes folder, and paste in all of our nodes. So now we have a whole bunch of nodes. Now if you look at the actual Pacman game, it's very obvious that we have way too many nodes. You don't want like pellets here or on any of these spots. So what we're going to do is create box colliders on top of these that are going to detect our node box colliders. And it's going to say, if we detect a node box collider, delete the node. So this is pretty easy to do. Let's just create an empty game object called node deleters. And then we're going to create an empty thing called deleter. And we're just going to give this a box collider 2D and make sure it's set to is trigger. And then we can click edit collider and move it onto the sections that we don't want our nodes. And right after I'm done this part, I will show you all of the sections too, if you don't already know. One thing that I want to show though is I'm going to create a new folder in here called like T deleter, and I'm going to make this box collider in the shape of a T. So we're going to have two elements to this, the vertical part of the T, and then we're going to create another one, and that's going to be the horizontal part of the T. Okay, so we have 3 box colliders for deletion so far. We have the one for home, but then we have the vertical part of the T and the horizontal part of the T. And because we added them both under a empty game object, we can now copy T deleter and then move all of the children inside of it. We can also rotate our Z to 90 degrees and then move it over here. This is just speeding it up a little bit. If this is a bit too confusing for you, you don't even need to do it. All you need to do is have individual deleters on every single piece that we don't need. So don't worry about that too much. Now I'm just going to fast forward through this. Okay, I'm highlighting the node deleters folder, and it looks like most of the nodes that we're deleting are now highlighted with these box colliders. So something I forgot to do, we're going to want to highlight all of our nodes, or not our nodes, our node deleters. Make sure you don't highlight any parent objects, just the deleters themselves. Okay, and then add component, rigid body 2D, expand it, and set body type to kinematic. And then what we're going to do is go back to our spawn nodes and delete this code because we don't need it anymore. And then while making sure that the node deleters are still highlighted, we're going to click add component again. And we're going to just type in node deleter. And then we can click create and add. And then double click it. Okay, so now we're going to type in void on trigger enter 2D. Make sure the capitals are the same. If you enter in Visual Studio, it'll automatically enter this in. And basically, this is going to be if our box collider connects with another box collider. We're going to say if collision.tag equals node, then destroy collision.gameObject. So earlier we named the tag for all of our nodes to tag. This is why. So if this box collider comes into contact with a game object that has the tag of node, it should delete it. So now let's click play. And in order for the collision to detect, you need a rigid body on the box collider. So that's why we added that. So now, as you can see, our game board is created. So we're going to do the exact same thing we did before. We're going to copy our nodes folder. We're going to turn off our game. We're going to delete our nodes folder, and we're going to paste. And now our game board is ready. We will never need these node deleters again. You can delete them or turn them off if you want to. Same as these scripts. We're going to move our scripts into our scripts folder. But again, we will never need to go back to that. Those scripts were just made to help us set up our game board, which we now have.